Bir
An introduction to Fear with Variations. Cemileri, an art critic, states that it is in poetry that word puts itself as form, and what corresponds to the word in poetry is, in Karasu's prose, meaning that puts itself as form. Hence, writing is not the form that wraps meaning, but writing produces the meaning what it wraps. End of quote. Bilge Karasu, one of the leading authors in contemporary Turkish fiction, wrote an unparalleled experimental piece named Çeşitlemeli Korku, Fear with Variations in 1974, in madrigal form, mainly composed for 5 human voices. Karasu wrote the text in 4 columns in a poem-like structure, although it is primarily prose. What is unique for this text is that these separate blocks of words durations were to be vocalized in such choreography that the text would sound like a prose madrigal, orchestrated by the author himself. The original hand-drawn, extraordinary notation pages of the text is part of his book as an end piece in Kısmet Büfesi, and was then recorded in its original form. What made me put this experimental work on the architectural studio education agenda was the dramatic findings of Ege Berensel, a video artist and a theoretician on film, of the bands of Karasu's recordings in dump, which also included his 7-page typewritten copy of Fear with Variations.
bir daldan kuşun ardından
bırakıverdi.
We have 3 versions of Fear with Variations: the typewritten version, the sound record, and the notations. Art critic Cemileri further states in his book Where the Writing To is Torn that Karasu considers himself as an architect, as a space organizer, as a designer who tries to create empty spaces for the reader to exist, move, play. What is remarkable here is the text is written for 5 tones, but why is it in 4 columns? Between the first 3, a more vigorous exchange takes place. The first 3 columns are in lowercase and are often interrupted with dashes, which encourages a vertical reading of each sound block. Written in uppercase, the 4th block is bass, which appears at far right on the page. Unlike the first 3 blocks, it is scarcely broken and rests on more extensive passages. Unlike the quartets, soprano, alto, tenor, and baritones, rapid and transitional nature, the bass exhibits the continuity of a monologue, which can be assumed to be the author's fundamental narrative heard from the bottom.
Anılarım senin geleceğin oluyor. Gerçeklik duyusunu yitirip, uzaktan uzağa, hep senin sivrildiğin bir pus içinde yaşamaya başladığım şu anda.
The text consists of a total of 5 images, and each image constitutes a section. The first, feather leaf; the second, ant; the third, insect; the 4th, olive, poplar, willow; and finally, the 5th, fear. Quantitatively, the total number of sound blocks in 7 places and their distribution can be examined. The duration of each sound block was calculated from the sound recording. In the sound recording, the text blocks are occasionally single tone, frequently multi-layered. These aspects have also been analyzed in POMI in the Studio for Potential Architecture. By giving a color to each sound type from soprano to bass, it was possible to observe when the blocks were monophonic and when they were polyphonic. In the recording of 1974, Tijen Par, Candan Teksoy were soprano and alto vocalists. The famous Turkish composer İlhan Osmanbaş was tenor, Başar Sabuncu bariton and Cüneyt Türel bass vocalist. The k sounds often remind themselves as the second part of the recording. These voices occasionally have the rhythm of a military march, the echo of the dominant repressive regime of that period. The sound layers of the recording score the fall of a leaf or the curvature of a willow tree with rising and descending syllabic sounds or with resonating syllables. The recording is very innovative even today and keeps its uniqueness. In spite of this, it is neglected and holds little space in the literature on Karasu. It is surprising that there is no in-depth academic study on fear with variations. For this reason, it was very demanding for us to decipher the work in Pomi and to have access to veritable knowledge in order to fabricate its architectural significance. Karasu gives the notation schemes at the end of his book Kısmet Büfesi. The notation consists of 21 pieces of horizontally drawn diagrams. Each diagram has 5 horizontal bands for soprano, alto, tenor, baritone and bass. The average walking speed is 5 km per hour for humans, and almost 99 minutes voice recording complies with an average of 725 meters walking distance. If you had listened to this recording from your headphones, you would have walked that distance. Subsequently, we reduced the speed to 3 kilometers per hour and the distance to 600 meters, a low-paced roll. Now I will be dealing with the first Pomi design, navigating between frames and layers. Designers Gözde Güven and İsmail Kayan, both students of architecture in Pomi, divided the text into 19 text duration blocks. The first partition comprises a short duration block of the words a fur, a feather. In the design, this portion is architecturally shaped, comparing the text, the recording and the notation. This short text is read by all 5 vocals. The design uses a frame for each sound. Each frame is structured from freestanding steel profiles. The innermost frame corresponds to bass, while the outermost to soprano. Polyphony matches with concentrated, stratified framings. The durations of the strata are consistent with their elongation. They lie in plan in accordance with walking speed. The 19 text blocks in the architectural design are detached from each other with spacious breathing intervals. This allows them to be deployed in space. The monologue of bass is finding its place in the design with 1 meter upraised. The seemingly unstructured k sounds become an important architectural empty signifier. So the rhythmic section of the k sounds that divide the text into 2 equal parts corresponds to a colonnaded garden in the layout plan. The layout plan consists of 2 groups of frames at ground level and another 2 below ground level, each of which is located perpendicularly. After the initial 2 groups, a ramp reaches the garden level below the ground. And now I'll be dealing with the second Pomi design, a topological topography of possibilities. Designers were Tamerlan Cafarov and Süleyman Özlü. Their design, which presumes that the soprano constitutes a solitary line from onset to closing, augments the convolutions by 5 times to make the vertical gesture comprehensible. This transaction is also appropriated for 4 tones. distinct graphics for soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone are obtained. The notation of Karasu is weaving these sounds to one another. The fifth layer, bass, doesn't join the weaving of the quartet. Hence, the bass is specified as a neutral constituent as water. S, A, B, and T each have been scaled with a length of 300 meters. These parallel lines are inlaid by 5 meters. Thus, with two vocals, a topographic corridor with a length of 300 meters and a width of 5 can be established. Permutation of 4 elements gives a total of 24 possibilities, which constitutes the overall topography of sound of the work. The terrain is simply a sequence of these permutations. Here, a strange and unique mathematical situation emerges. Let us take the SABT group as a lined-up unit in the topography of possibilities. SA constitutes a plane. This plane is adjacent to the plane AB, and this to plane BT. SABT is one out of 24 possible combinations, and in fact is made up of 3 merged planes, SA, AB, and BT. The SA corridor repeats 6 times in all terrain cross-sections in 24 possibilities. A sum of 73 ribbons are used by omitting all consecutive repetitive features. In the universe of possibilities we live, we can only walk along a straight line because a single possibility can occur at a certain given time. However, by placing a network of griddle paths at an angle of other than 90 degrees to this length, we can go through a meta-universe where there occurs more than one possibility at the same time. This situation, spatially, a transtemporal polyphony, a type of meta-polyphony that Karasu's text probably did not theorize, a quantum polyphony, the topography as meta-diagram. So, what is POMI? The Studio for Potential Architecture is an architectural studio I launched in 2002, inspired from the ULIPO, Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, the workshop for potential literature founded by Le Lyonnais and Raymond Queneau in 1960. While I was arriving at the idea of a studio at an architectural school in the preliminary years of my assistantship, my aspiration was to experiment the procedures of ULIPO in architecture. In 17 years, I had the opportunity to experiment on numerous topics, each time with a different group of architecture students every semester. Finally, in spring 2019, inspired by Raymond Queneau's exercises in style and Matt Madden's 99 Ways to Tell a Story, we made a book titled 199 Plus Architecture After POMI. This book invents around 200 procedures, tests them all on a house project, and thus turns out to be an encyclopedical theorization of architectural constraints. The book is reproduced as a very limited edition of 50 copies, and all the bookbinding work was done in hand sewing. This is a homage to the word ouvroir, meaning sewing atelier in French, the O of the abbreviation ULIPO. Can those ULIPO-inspired experiments that POMI pursued be considered as proof that architectural design under constraint can lead a productive and creative lane that no other method can promise? My dream is to give an affirmative reply to this question.